Hello, my sleepless warriors, and welcome back to another nighttime story. Today we will be taking a look into the creation of the coding language Python. This subject is interesting yet boring at the same time, so hopefully it will help guide you into the dream world where you can rest for the coming days. Please take a moment to get yourself situated and ready before the story begins. If you enjoy this content and the video helped you sleep, please like and subscribe when you wake up. I will be experimenting with various types of content and ideas, so let me know what you like in the comments. Let's get started. Once upon a time, not in some socialist fairy tale kingdom, but in the very real, very fluorescent lit halls of the Centrum Wiskunde and Informatica in Amsterdam, a quiet rebellion began. It was the winter of 1989. The Cold War was ending. Greta Thunberg's acid-washed jeans were peaking, and Guido van Rossum was bored over the holidays. Most people, when left alone at Christmas, might binge-watch bad television or reflect on life's big questions. Guido, however, decided to write a programming language. Because nothing says festive cheer quite like syntax trees. He'd been working on ABC, a language intended for teaching non-programmers how to code. It was elegant and idealistic, like a poetry major who thinks they're the next Shakespeare but can't find their keys. Guido liked it up to a point, but it lacked extensibility. It was allergic to doing useful things. So Guido did what every engineer with free time and mild resentment dreams of. He started over. With a clean slate, caffeine in his veins, and a sense of both purpose and sarcasm, he gave birth to a new language. Not named after some obscure mathematician or self-important acronym, but after Monty Python's Flying Circus. Yes, really. Because nothing screams this will eventually run AI algorithms like a 1970s British sketch comedy show. He called it Python. From its earliest breath, Python was weird in all the right ways. Its syntax relied on indentation, not optional, not aesthetic, but legally binding. Some developers saw this as a declaration of war. Others called it clarity. But in Python, whitespace was sacred. You didn't just indent for fun, you indented for justice. By 1991, version 0.9.0 slithered into the world. It had classes, it had functions, it had exceptions. It even had core data types like lists and dictionaries, because Guido knew that people don't want to reinvent arrays at 2 a.m. while debugging rejects. And then came the people. They found Python refreshingly human. It didn't try to out-clever you, it didn't whisper sweet nothings in machine code. It said, let's keep it simple, stupid. It was the language equivalent of wearing sweatpants to a job interview and somehow getting the job anyway. The community grew. So did the philosophy. Enter Tim Peters with The Zen of Python, a list of guiding principles that developers now quote like scripture and ignore like speed limits. Among them, simple is better than complex. Readability counts. And the infamous, there should be one, and preferably only one, obvious way to do it. Which, let's be honest, gets violated weekly. By 1994, Python 1.0 arrived. Functional programming tools like Lambda, Map, and Reduce joined the party. The standard library expanded, and Python's identity solidified. It was practical, powerful, and just self-aware enough to be funny about it. Python 2 came in 2000 like a rock star with a new haircut. It brought list comprehensions, partial Unicode support, and a lot of features people didn't know they needed until they broke something. But Python 2 had flaws, deep, foundational ones, the kind that whispered, one day you'll have to rewrite everything. So Guido did what any responsible creator would do. He built a completely incompatible future version and unleashed it with a cheerful, good luck. Python 3 dropped in 2008. It fixed so many problems and introduced new ones called migration nightmares. The community promptly split like a pair of jeans under pressure. Python 2 loyalists dug in. Python 3 evangelists preached from mountaintops. It was a decade-long custody battle. But eventually Python 3 emerged victorious and Python 2 was sent to the great deprecated heap in the sky in 2020. By then, Python had transcended niche use cases. It wasn't just a scripting language, it was the language. System administrators used it, web developers adored it, scientists trusted it. And then the data people arrived: NumPy, SciPy, Pandas, Jupyter. These weren't just tools, they were prophecies. They turned Python into the lingua franca of data science. You could write a model to detect cancer, optimize supply chains, and then finish your day by scraping tweets about Taylor Swift, all in the same notebook. Machine learning took over. TensorFlow and PyTorch, backed by Google and Facebook, respectively, embraced Python like it was a long-lost sibling. Deep learning flourished. AI came alive. And Python, bless its humble indentation, stood at the center of it all. Meanwhile, the web crew didn't sleep either. Django and Flask gave Python a front-row seat in back-end development. Flask was the minimalist, you brought your own batteries. Django was the maximalist, it brought a Tesla charger, backup generator, and an entire user authentication system you didn't ask for. Then came Fast API, which finally said, what if REST APIs were fast, type-checked, and didn't feel like punching drywall? And Python said, you had me at not awful. In DevOps, Python scripts automated everything. Deployment, monitoring, pizza delivery, probably. If Bash was the unwashed wizard of scripting, Python was the polite, well-groomed sorcerer who sent you logs in JSON format. In education, Python became the first language taught to students because it looked less like math homework and more like logic that made sense. It was the gateway drug for a generation. Easy to learn, hard to master, impossible to quit. And somehow, Python stayed itself. It didn't chase trends, it became them. Guido stepped down in 2018 as BDFL benevolent dictator for life, passing the torch to a council of core developers. Democracy, open source style, surprisingly civil, mostly. Today, Python continues to grow, evolve, and, occasionally, confuse newcomers with things like asyncio typing, or whys doesn't always do what they think it does, but it also builds rockets, powers AI, automates companies, and helps students print "Hello World" for the very first time. Python didn't win because it was perfect. It won because it was kind, forgiving, consistent, and just powerful enough to take over the world without making a fuss. After the dust settled from the great Python 2 to 3 exodus, a saga longer than some royal successions, the language entered a kind of renaissance. Except instead of paintings and symphonies, it was frameworks, Jupyter notebooks, and an endless stream of Stack Overflow posts tagged with, "Why doesn't this work?" By this time, Python was no longer something you just used, it was something you lived. It had grown into the toolbelt of the modern technologist. If it couldn't solve a problem directly, someone had written a package that could, probably 3 of them, and one of them hadn't been maintained in 6 years. The Python Package Index, PyPI to its friends, became the chaotic library of Alexandria for Pythonistas. It held packages for everything: web scraping, file renaming, facial recognition, spreadsheet parsing, and something vaguely titled anti-gravity that was more joke than utility. And yes, you could install them all with a single command. Whether they would work together was another question. Python was embedded in the DNA of modern automation. System administrators wrote scripts in it. Security engineers wrote tools with it. CI/CD pipelines depended on it. Somewhere, in every enterprise, there was a Python script, keeping the lights on and absolutely no one willing to touch it. The cloud only amplified this. AWS Lambda supported Python. Azure functions too. Google Cloud Platform wasn't going to miss out. If there was an API, Python could call it. If there was a task to automate, Python could wrap it in a try-except block and pretend it was fault-tolerant. Meanwhile, Jupyter Notebooks took academia and business by storm. These weren't just notebooks, they were spellbooks. Scientists could write code, explain it, visualize it, and then immediately realize they made a terrible mistake, all in one document. It was beautiful. Researchers loved it, data scientists adored it, and managers? Well, they liked that they could scroll through a notebook and nod like they understood what gradient descent meant. Python's ascent in machine learning had become unstoppable. PyTorch gained traction for its intuitive design and dynamic computation graphs. Basically, it did what you told it to do instead of throwing a tantrum. TensorFlow, on the other hand, matured into a production workhorse. The two became like rival siblings, different personalities, same household, both powered by Python. Even deep learning models, those digital beasts with millions of parameters and GPU dependencies that cost more than a small car, ran on Python. It didn't matter if you were training a model to translate languages, compose music, or hallucinate cat memes. Python was the interface. It whispered sweet, syntactically clean nothings into the silicon mind of the machine. And let's not forget Hugging Face, a company with a name that sounds like it makes children's toys, but actually builds some of the most advanced NLP libraries in existence. With transformers and datasets, they turned Python into the interface for language models that could write poetry, translate dialects, and probably judge you silently. Python wasn't just making waves in software, it was embedding itself into hardware too. MicroPython and CircuitPython let hobbyists code directly on microcontrollers. That's right, blinking LEDs and building robot arms with the same language you use to scrape recipes from food blogs. And if you thought Python would ever get left behind in web development, think again. Django matured into the leather armchair framework of Python web apps, established, opinionated, and maybe a bit overpacked. Flask remained the free spirit. Starlet and FastAPI were the cool new kids, fast, async friendly, and less likely to yell at you when your dependencies got tangled. The typing system, long treated as a helpful but optional suggestion box, evolved too. Type hints, introduced in Python 3.5, started showing up in more code bases, not because developers suddenly became organized, but because linters and IDEs started making judgmental noises when they didn't. Eventually, Python even learned a bit of pattern matching, finally bringing a more graceful alternative to those endless if, elif, elif, else chains. Version 3.10 introduced structural pattern matching, allowing you to write code that looked like it had studied abroad in Haskell, but still drank American beer. Guido, though officially retired from leadership, wasn't done. He returned to work on the Faster CPython project, aiming to make the language faster without compromising its soul. Python 3.11 came with serious performance gains, because apparently everyone suddenly remembered that speed was also a thing. The language was evolving, but without losing what made it Python: the white space, the readability, the spirit of doing more with less. It kept its soul even as it gained features that would have once been considered sacrilegious by the early Zen crowd. Every year, Python climbed higher in popularity charts. It wasn't just the most loved or most used, it was both. It crossed disciplines, industries, continents. It became the background radiation of computing, quiet, constant, everywhere. Python wasn't just a tool, it was infrastructure, invisible, reliable, and only noticed when something broke. You could find it lurking in back-end systems, embedded scripts, data pipelines, and every corner of scientific computing. It was the duct tape of the digital world, duct tape that somehow came with an import statement. Educational platforms couldn't get enough of it. Python was the de facto first language for millions of students. It had a syntax that didn't look like ancient Sumerian. It didn't require you to declare your love for static types or beg a compiler for forgiveness. It just worked, until it didn't, at which point it failed loudly and with impressive stack traces. Universities adopted it, boot camps worshipped it, and YouTubers made entire careers out of explaining Python decorators to sleep-deprived viewers. There were tutorials on everything, from web scraping Amazon prices to building Discord bots to using turtle graphics to draw increasingly deranged spirals. Python was learning made tactile, approachable, almost too approachable really, some might say dangerously empowering. And with all this growth came new responsibilities. Packaging, for example, became the collective thorn in the community's side. Python packaging was like IKEA furniture, theoretically simple, practically nightmarish. pip, virtual NV, setup tools, poetry, pipenv, and that one Reddit thread from 2017 all offered competing advice on how to install a library without summoning dependency hell. But the community adapted. Tutorials got better, tools got cleaner. Python didn't solve packaging, it merely wore the problem down until everyone agreed to stop talking about it at parties. Meanwhile, the rise of AI didn't just elevate Python, it fused with it. Machine learning pipelines were written in it. Experiment tracking dashboards were built with it. Training, testing, deploying, all Python. The model itself might run on C++ or CUDA under the hood, but Python was the front-of-house maître d', elegant, friendly, and politely ignoring the flames in the kitchen. In the industry, Python became the one-size-fits-all solution. Startups used it to ship fast. Enterprises used it because it integrated with everything. Government agencies used it because, let's face it, someone found an old NASA script and said, we can reuse this, right? Open source contributors carried the torch, refining libraries, improving documentation, and battling edge cases so bizarre they'd give Lovecraft nightmares. Every PEP was scrutinized, every release argued over, but it worked. The language grew not just because it could, but because people cared. It wasn't all sunshine and well-linted code, of course. Python had, and still has, its quirks. The global interpreter lock, GIL, remains a point of contention, a necessary evil that ensures thread safety while simultaneously making concurrency feel like black magic. But even that was being addressed, slowly, methodically, by those brave enough to dig into Python's C internals without losing their sanity. Corporate support didn't hurt either. Microsoft's Visual Studio Code became the go-to editor for Python development. GitHub Copilot, trained on public code, a significant portion of which was Python, could auto-complete entire functions. It wasn't always right, but it was confident, like a toddler in a Batman costume. Cloud platforms doubled down. AWS offered Python SDKs for everything from EC2 to SageMaker. Google Cloud built client libraries that worked seamlessly with Python scripts. Azure piped Python through its services with a smile. Even Docker embraced Python's ubiquity, with countless containers spinning up every minute, running tiny Python apps doing one very specific job, usually while leaking memory. Through it all, Python retained its identity. It didn't try to become the fastest or most memory-efficient language. It didn't wear the badge of cutting edge like Rust or Go. It just stayed useful, versatile, forgiving. The kind of language that says, I got you, as you bash out a script 15 minutes before a deadline. Developers, beginners, teachers, tinkerers, they all found a home in Python. It was as much a community as it was a language. And despite its age, it felt fresh, updated regularly, debated passionately, and deployed relentlessly. Python's staying power wasn't just technical, it was philosophical. At its core, Python wasn't trying to be clever, it wasn't showing off, it wasn't chasing trends or slapping on buzzwords like quantum-ready or blockchain-enabled. It was designed to be readable, to be learned, to be used. It's one of the few languages that openly admits, in official documentation no less, that people matter more than machines. Python chose to speak clearly, not tersely, not cryptically. It was a language with manners, one that politely asked, "May I automate that for you?" instead of screaming at your face in segmentation faults. And the result? Developers who stuck around, who taught, who built, who answered endless questions on Stack Overflow about the difference between is and equals equals with the patience of someone explaining algebra to a cat. The community wasn't just active, it was generous. Newcomers weren't just tolerated, they were expected. In fact, Pythonic became a cultural ideal. Code wasn't just meant to run, it was meant to be beautiful. You didn't just write loops, you used comprehensions. You didn't hack unless it was a one-liner so elegant it deserved to be engraved on stone tablets. Python had a style, a mood, a way. And while other languages fractured into rigid factions, typed versus untyped, functional versus object-oriented, Python took the diplomatic route. Want to use classes? Great. Prefer functions? Go ahead. Need to sprinkle in some async? Sure, here's a coroutine. As long as it made sense and didn't hurt anyone, Python welcomed all flavors of madness. That flexibility made Python both a joy and occasionally a carnival of unintended consequences. For every beautifully designed framework, there was a script someone found on a forum in 2009 that still, inexplicably, worked. No one knew how. No one dared touch it. But that was Python. It encouraged experimentation. It let people build tools, share them, and watch them take off. It let anyone submit a PEP. It let a global crowd of developers debate colon placement and docstring conventions like it was the fate of civilization. And in some small tech nerd way it was. Even as new technologies emerged, quantum computing, edge AI, neural symbolic fusion, Python was still the tool people reached for. Not because it could do everything itself, but because it plugged into everything that could. It wasn't the engine, it was the control panel. The irony was thick. A language born out of frustration with academic rigidity, named after a surreal comedy troupe, had become the pragmatic choice for the most serious fields in computing. From financial forecasting to bioinformatics, from network automation to film production pipelines, Python was the steady, syntactically blessed glue holding it all together. New versions continued to roll out, 3.11, 3.12, each more polished, faster, smarter. Backwards compatibility became more stable, more thought out, tooling improved, IDEs glowed with helpful completions. Linting became so robust it could shame you like a disappointed librarian. And somehow the language didn't lose its soul. It remained gentle, helpful, open. It wasn't just about the code, it was about making the act of writing code feel less like ritual sacrifice and more like quietly solving puzzles in your slippers. The epic continued not with a bang, but with a steady rhythm. New PEPs proposed and refined. Core devs debated with passion and civility, most of the time. Conferences echoed with keynotes, coffee cups, and quiet awe. And through it all, Python kept humming along in millions of environments, speaking plainly, performing capably, refusing to die. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't smug, but it was everywhere. In time, even the world beyond tech began to quietly acknowledge Python. Not by name necessarily, but by presence. Python scripts ran behind the scenes in streaming services, powering recommendation algorithms that gently nudged viewers into binge-watching entire seasons they hadn't planned for. It whispered through logistics networks, adjusting delivery routes on the fly. It assisted scientists in genomics, economists in modeling, artists in generative work. The language had become an unseen participant in almost every modern endeavor. Even Hollywood took notice. Not of Python the language, but of what it could do. Studios used Python to automate rendering processes, to manage massive file systems of animation assets, to subtly tweak 1,000 shaders until a single frame finally stopped flickering. Pixar, ILM Weta, all had scripts running that bore Python's signature, simple, flexible, quietly magical. But Python never paused to admire itself. It didn't have time. There were too many libraries to maintain, too many environments to support, too many newcomers asking whether Stinit is supposed to hurt like that. The Python Software Foundation, with its humble non-profit status and Herculean list of responsibilities, quietly shepherded it all. Conferences were hosted, grants were distributed, Pythonistas were supported, financially, logistically, emotionally. Python also did something rare. It grew older, but not bitter. It didn't lash out against newer languages. It didn't mock Rust's safety or Go's concurrency or JavaScript's inexplicable confidence. Instead, Python watched them all with the weary amusement of a language that had seen things. It didn't have to be the best at everything. It just had to keep showing up. And show up it did, everywhere. In quantum computing research labs where IBM's Qiskit ran Python APIs on actual quantum circuits. in weather prediction models built by government agencies, in Raspberry Pi classrooms where kids lit up LEDs in delight. It was the great equalizer, approachable enough for beginners, robust enough for experts. At this point, Python wasn't evolving in a straight line, it was expanding like a nebula. More libraries, more integrations, more community-maintained madness. You could build GUIs with it, write games, create machine learning models, craft REST APIs, or simply use it to rename 100 files that all had the word final in them. The tooling had leveled up. IDEs like PyCharm and VS Code delivered predictive typing, debugger integration, real-time linting, and dark themes moody enough to fuel 10-hour coding sessions. Linters like Flake 8 and formatters like Black offered the passive-aggressive nudging that turned spaghetti code into something vaguely presentable. People still debated things, like whether a Syncio was a blessing or a trap, whether type hints ruined the soul of Python or saved it. But even those arguments had a strange civility to them. Disagreements were passionate but rarely poisonous. There was something about Python that invited cooperation over conquest. And Python had jokes, inside jokes, module names that referenced Monty Python, comments in libraries that read like whispered sarcasm, even Easter eggs like import this, that summoned up the zen as if Python were reminding you, hey, don't take this too seriously, because Python never forgot where it came from. A bored man in the Netherlands, a comedy sketch troupe, a desire for something that worked without hurting. And it never forgot what it was, a language designed not for machines, but for the humans who speak to them. We are at the halfway mark now, friends. I hope you are still not awake. Somewhere between the microservices craze and the NFT apocalypse, Python continued its quiet reign. Not by brute force or by shouting the loudest at developer conferences, but by being the reliable multi-tool that didn't care what the problem was, it would just fix it, or at least try really hard before throwing a very detailed traceback. The language by now was no longer just a tool, it was a shared language, literally and metaphorically. Cross-disciplinary teams, from designers to roboticists, used Python to communicate ideas. Python code appeared in notebooks, white papers, and GitHub repos written by people who still referred to themselves as not real programmers. And that was Python's real power. It had no ego. It didn't mock you for needing print debugging. It didn't punish you for forgetting a semicolon. It welcomed beginners and experts alike, with the kind of flexibility that made some languages feel insecure. Still, Python kept pushing forward. With every new version came subtle refinements, improved exception messages, less cryptic, more emotionally supportive, faster performance, sometimes on purpose, better tooling occasionally. Typing support grew teeth. MyPy and Pyrite became staples of large projects. You could write Python that felt almost statically typed, if you were into that kind of thing. And just when people thought Python had peaked, when they assumed it had reached its final cozy form, another wave of innovation crashed into it. Generative AI, models that could write, draw, compose, chat, and hallucinate citations were powered by Python pipelines. LLMs, large language models, became the new buzzword, and they ran almost entirely through Python tooling. Hugging Face libraries, LangChain integrations, OpenAI APIs, all pip installable. Developers who used to write marketing automation scripts were now spinning up conversational agents with personalities and, occasionally terrifying, opinions. Suddenly, Python wasn't just the language of data. It was the language of minds, artificial ones, yes, but minds nonetheless. Python code stitched together datasets, trained transformers, optimized vector embeddings, and deployed chatbots capable of convincingly pretending to understand your existential dread. And once again, Python didn't gloat, it just added another import. The story didn't slow, it accelerated. Python embedded itself further in wearable devices, in spacecraft diagnostics, in financial models with so many decimals they could make your GPU cry. It adapted, morphed, absorbed new paradigms without needing to reinvent itself every 5 years. Work continued on the core interpreter. The faster CPython project delivered on its promise. Python 3.11 brought speed improvements that made entire startups rerun their benchmarks in quiet disbelief. Async features matured, memory handling improved. Even the GIL, Python's infamous global interpreter lock, was now the subject of serious removal experiments. Meanwhile, the ecosystem flourished. Python's own packaging story, while still capable of summoning ghosts from the PyPI dependency crypt, was less of a horror film than it once was. Poetry gained adoption. Pip improved error messages. Venv stopped breaking quite as often. Progress. And through all of it, Python continued to whisper its mantra. Clarity over cleverness. Simplicity over spectacle. A return always to code that made sense, even if you hadn't touched it in months. It wasn't just a language anymore, it was the nervous system of modern computation. As Python surged through yet another era of innovation, something strange happened. People started forgetting it was ever considered slow or outdated or, heaven forbid, just a scripting language. It had quietly ascended to the status of a universal adapter, and most developers didn't even stop to marvel, they just used it. There were Python-powered APIs being called from the edge of space and from basement servers under someone's IKEA desk. People were using it to 3D print prosthetics, to simulate black holes, to teach high school students, and to wrangle Excel sheets that had been cursed by office workers long since retired. Python didn't just serve use cases, it invited chaos. It let developers build things quickly and refactor them later. Or never. Entire tech stacks were held together with Python scripts and hope. In many cases, the only documentation was a series of to-do comments, and one README that simply read, "Don't touch this." But through all of it, Python remained weirdly fun. It was a language that felt like home. You could import anti-gravity just to laugh. You could, from Geschichten Future Diki, import braces and be told flatly, not a chance. It wasn't just a utility, it had a pulse. And as AI models began generating Python code in real time, writing scripts, solving problems, auto-completing full applications, it didn't spell obsolescence. If anything, it extended Python's reach even further. Now, people didn't just use Python, they talked to it. In turn, Python grew conversational. It appeared in notebooks with markdown narratives, in voice-based assistants, in decision-making tools that output suggestions instead of errors. Its role had shifted, not just a means of telling machines what to do, but a bridge for humans trying to understand what machines had done. Its syntax was now everywhere, on interactive websites, in AI prompts, in the minds of people who didn't even realize they were coding. That simple pattern of indentation, of def and return, had become as recognizable as punctuation. Core developers kept steering the ship. They iterated, they optimized, they debated deeply philosophical questions like whether match statements should allow wildcards shaped like underscores or stars. They dealt with Unicode again and again and again. Python wasn't perfect, but it was persistent, and in that persistence it became something bigger than syntax. In classrooms, the first "Hello World" was written in Python. In labs, the first detection of a gravitational wave was plotted with Python. In basements, a teenager's first game, built with Pygame, ran for 3 frames before crashing, and they still called it a success. Python had stopped being a tool. It had become a memory format, a way to capture ideas, curiosity, and the inevitable descent into stacked traces. And like all good legends, it just kept going. It didn't need to brag, it didn't need to shout, it just kept working. And as more machines began to write code for us, Python quietly became the language of that dialogue, the one both humans and computers seemed to agree on. The world had changed. And Python had simply adapted, nodded, and asked politely, what next? What came next, of course, was everything. Python showed up in use cases no one had predicted. It integrated into game engines, powered AI art tools, acted as the back end for voice-controlled kitchen appliances, and somewhere out there, ran the entire logic of a smart toilet. Developers didn't ask, "Can Python do this?" They assumed it could, and then waited to see what libraries had already solved it. It was no longer about writing code from scratch. It was about assembling pieces, trusting the ecosystem, and occasionally sacrificing a rubber duck to the debugging gods. Python's omnipresence had become a kind of quiet folklore in the tech world. It was the duct tape behind mission-critical systems, the favorite tool of rogue sysadmins, the MPV engine for startups, the secret sauce in enterprise automation. If something worked mysteriously well, odds were good a Python script was hiding beneath it, grinning smugly between its imports. And while other languages jockeyed for dominance, each promising newer, faster, safer abstractions, Python simply kept rolling out improvements. It didn't need a manifesto, it didn't need a corporate overlord, it had a community. And that community just kept building. There were still quirks, of course, still oddities. Still moments when none would sneak into a dataset like a raccoon into a kitchen, still stacked traces that read like psychological horror. But Python was never about perfection. It was about resilience. It didn't pretend to be flawless, it just worked through the mess. And the tools matured around it. Linting got smarter, IDEs learned your habits, Jupyter notebooks became collaborative, versioned, and hosted in the cloud. You could write Python in your browser, on your tablet, through your phone, and in a pinch, yes, even in Excel. Python had become the most universal, non-universal language. It wasn't statically typed, but it could be. It wasn't purely functional, but it allowed it. It wasn't real-time, but it was fast enough, especially when half the job was parsing JSON and calling APIs. It wasn't perfect. It was good. And then, somewhere along the timeline, something even more interesting happened. People started designing things for Python. Libraries weren't just built in Python. They were designed because of it. Developers leaned into its patterns, its ergonomics, its culture of just enough abstraction to not explode. New tools prioritized Python integration first. Robotics, SDKs, quantum simulators, AI vector stores, even blockchain libraries, for the brave few who hadn't rage-quit Web3. Everyone knew if it didn't work with Python, it probably wouldn't get used. It was no longer the underdog, no longer the quirky upstart. Python was the quiet default, the one chosen not because it was new, but because it was dependable. Even languages that claimed to replace it often ended up wrapping themselves in it. Python bindings were built for Rust tools, C++ engines, even Java projects. They couldn't escape it. They didn't really want to. Python had transcended language. It was now infrastructure. It was culture. It was trust encoded in indentation. And somehow, still, it was fun. By now, Python was no longer just part of the story. It was the story. Its syntax had become shorthand for creativity. Its libraries were the toolkit behind every what-if that spiraled out of a late-night coding session. From startups running on 3 Red Bulls and a single server to research institutions tracking tectonic shifts, Python had embedded itself deep in the marrow of modern development. It wasn't just for developers anymore. Designers used it to automate batch exports. Marketers used it for A/B testing workflows. Teachers, analysts, artists, engineers, all of them Python literate or at least Python adjacent. The barrier to entry was so low it practically tripped over itself. If you could read, you could write Python, maybe not well, but enough to get something moving. And that's what Python had always been about. Motion. Progress without gatekeeping. It let you start with garbage code and refine it as you learned. It didn't punish you for your ignorance. It let you deploy it to production and learn consequences in real time. It also built humility. Every Python user had a story. Of the time they misused asterisk args or tried to debug a list comprehension with side effects. Of when they mistyped self and crashed an entire app. Python was generous, but it was also firm. You could do great things, but you'd earn them. The language aged, but never rusted. The PSF remained the humble backbone, quietly shaping governance, hosting PyCon, supporting mentorships, and ensuring that the language remained open. not just in license, but in spirit. New contributors arrived, some stayed, some built the next tools others would rely on, and the cycle continued. Even as AI tools began generating full scripts on command, Python's role didn't diminish. If anything, it expanded. You could now whisper a prompt into an LLM and receive a Python script that mostly worked. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it only worked because Python's syntax was so clear, so logical, that even machines found it welcoming. In classrooms, Python became as fundamental as Excel, as universal as Google Docs. You didn't ask if students should learn Python, you asked when. Elementary schools, middle schools, some particularly ambitious kindergartners, and the old guard watched with bemused amazement. The developers who had been there when print didn't need parentheses, who remembered the awkward adolescence of Python 2, who had watched the community argue over walrus operators and f-strings as if they were matters of state. They didn't see Python's future as a replacement for other languages. It had no need to conquer. Python's future was as a constant, a bridge, a foundation, a friend. It wasn't the only language, it didn't want to be, but it had earned its place in the center by showing up, staying open, and reminding everyone, constantly, that code should be readable, should be clear, should not require a doctorate to pass. The world would keep changing, new paradigms would rise, developers would argue, but Python would still be there. Not because it was flashy, but because it never forgot who it was for. In the grand theater of technology, where languages rise and fall like overfunded startups, Python stood still, not static, but steadfast, not desperate for attention, not engineered for hype. It simply endured, adapted, persisted. Its community kept growing generation by generation. Kids who first learned Python from Turtle Graphics were now teaching it to others. The teachers became engineers, the engineers became mentors, the mentors became the ones debating PEPs and sipping coffee on contributor calls. The tools kept evolving, packaging finally approached sanity. Python 3.12 and beyond brought performance so smooth, it made some question if they'd accidentally switched languages. Async reached a level of maturity where it was more than just trendy. It was reliable, predictable even. And somehow, Python kept being rediscovered. New industries embraced it, new developers found it. Entire generations came of age, assuming Python was just there. A given, a default, like the internet, like oxygen, like a trusty pair of boots. Machine learning became more conversational. LLMs got weirder, smarter, more opinionated. They trained on code, wrote code, talked about code. And their favorite language? Always Python. Because the syntax was clean, the logic direct, the patterns timeless. If a machine was going to dream in code, it was dreaming in Python. And in all this momentum, Python never lost its heart. It never became smug, it never tried to be elite, it never demanded reverence. It just wanted to help you do things, to get out of the way and let your thoughts run. Even in its weirdest corners, Python remained joyful. Whether it was a one-liner that turned a list inside out, or a hidden Jandundabala method you forgot existed, there was always something in Python that made you go, huh, neat. So yes, Python became ubiquitous. It showed up in places you'd never expect. But more than anything, it stayed. It stayed useful. It stayed open. It stayed Python. And whether the future brought AI overlords, quantum processors, brain-computer interfaces, or whatever form Web 5 eventually takes, Python would be there, somewhere, nested in a module, imported with care, serving as the gentle voice reminding us that code doesn't have to be cryptic, that power and clarity aren't opposites, that sometimes the most extraordinary thing a language can do is make the complicated feel simple. And in that simplicity, build a bridge, from the beginner to the expert, from the past to the future, from the human to the machine. Python, after all, was never just a language. It was a love letter. And we are still writing it. Thank you for listening, and sleep well, my loves.